Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
The print watchers are extraordinarily smart people, watchers and readers. So chances are that many of you have heard already about what is called the Havana syndrome. Now, at first look, it would look like a fantasy. It would look like just one of those stories straight out of some piece of fiction, spy fiction in Lecaresque times. Frankly, given how sophisticated Le Carre has been, unlikely that John Le Carre would have bought into some idea like this. But some idea like this is now becoming a bit of a reality. Bit of a reality because you know what? Joe Biden has spoken about it, not in public, but while addressing the American intelligence community. That's been reported by the New York Times. Bill Burns, the new chief of the CIA, has spoken about it emphatically in his first interview to National Public Radio. NPR, a spokesperson for the National Security Council in the US, has talked about this, and US government at National Security Council level has set up a big committee. This committee has been set up under Avril Haines, who's the Director of National Intelligence, and this committee includes members from the CIA, FBI, the scientific community, etc., etc. And they are all looking at what exactly is Havana syndrome and what does it mean. Now, Havana syndrome is just called Havana syndrome because it's something that started in Cuban capital. Now, usually when something starts, particularly when something sort of news making and negative starts in some place, it gets named after that place, except unless it starts in China. Then if you name it after the place in China, like the Wuhan lab, then you are in deep trouble. But this is called Havana syndrome because in 2016, a bunch of American diplomats, particularly CIA officers posted there, and you can imagine how many CIA officers might be there in the US Embassy in Havana, they began to complain of some strange symptoms like memory loss, hearing loss. Some people said that they were hearing loud sounds in their head, bit like a racket made by cicadas. Cicadas, as you know, is an insect that is very common and which comes in swarms, particularly in the Americas. In India, you might say a bit like jinger. You remember that song, Jinger Bole Chiki Miki Chiki Miki? So these are insects that make noise. Insects don't speak, they don't have vocal cords, but these insects make noise by rubbing their hind legs and stuff like that. I'm not an entomologist. I just know that the study of insects is called entomology. So for more, read up or Google. But they said that they were hearing sounds of cicadas. Now what happens? So many people say, mere kaan mein jhaएं jhaएं ki awaaz ho rahi hai, right? But one says it, second says it, third says it, and so many say it. Then in the Canadian embassy also in Havana, many people said it. So when that happened, it was called Havana syndrome because initially a lot of people thought that one talked about it, second talked about it. This is a paranoid environment. After all, it's Havana. So everybody is just getting sort of psyched out. But these officers and their family members also, they were subjected to brain scans. And those brain scans in many cases showed brain damage of the kind that is caused by very loud explosions or even by accidents. Something like the subconcussion level. But these were damages on the brain which were visible in these scans. Of course, I presume that these were then self-limiting and self-fixing in the course of time. But this was something that was clear and present, and that was showing on the scans. That's why the reality of Havana syndrome came into being. After that, these problems emerged elsewhere. So initially when this happened, even if you ask me, when I read about it, I thought, this is Donald Trump's times. You know, Donald Trump and his people tend to talk like this. They are conspiracy theorists. This is nonsense. But now this is going on in Joe Biden's times. This is a much more conservative thinking, not conservative in a political sense, Republican conservative sense, not like that, but this is a much more conservatively thinking foreign policy and strategic establishment. So if they are also talking about it, and if they have set up a committee directly supervised by the Director of National Intelligence, that means there might be something to it. So this has now begun to happen. These complaints that started in Havana with American diplomats, Then they started coming in from other countries. So these have now been reported from many countries, including, say, Guangzhou in China, Moscow, of course, and most importantly, Vienna. Now, Vienna is the spying capital of the world from the times of the Cold War. One reason it is so popular with the spies also is that it has many of these international organizations, including IAEA. So a lot of the atomic energy or atomic secrets are traded in Vienna. And also, Austrian government has generally been very permissive about allowing spying activity by all countries as long as it doesn't hurt their own interests. Spies from many countries like to be in Vienna, and you can see that Vienna is a hotbed of spying by the US, British spies, Chinese spies, French spies, Russians, Iranians, you can understand why Iranians, Syrians, South Koreans, but not just that, Indians and Pakistanis as well. You can imagine that they'll be very active because in some ways a lot of the nuclear stuff sort of flows around in that rarefied circuit in Vienna. Now in Vienna, a large number of American officers reported this. When that happened, then Americans raised the alert level. As that happened, and this began to be seen seriously by American scientific agencies and security agencies and Department of Defense and Department of State, that is when the Russians reacted. So Russian government officially issued a statement calling this a stupid fantasy. So I read a statement from TASS. Everything is from serious stuff. So this is a statement that I read from TASS by the Russian spokesperson whose name is Alexander Bikantov. He's Russian Foreign Ministry's deputy spokesperson. So he said that what's happening in Vienna, or the stories about Vienna, are quote unquote fruits of unhealthy fantasies. Then he goes on to say, and this translation is TASS's translation, so I presume that it's correct from Russian to English. It is clear that Western tabloids' love for conspiracy theories is ineradicable. But we suggest the quality media avoid this precarious field because the next thing they will have to accuse the Russians of solar eclipses and snowfalls. There is no limit to such fantasies, and more will come if Washington propagandists have got into the act. Now, he said this, and then he said this is Russophobic fake news. Everybody's spreading Russophobic fake news. Fiction about this psychic race is beyond common sense. That's what he said. Then he goes on to say that, see, be sensible like the Canadians, because Canadians also initially thought that their diplomats were affected in Havana, but later the Canadians concluded that this was not because of any technology, but this was happening because of Caribbean cicadas, which I presume make different kinds of noise than American cicadas, and also because of some other issues there. So this is not to do with any technology. The Americans, on the other hand, suspect, and now as to some of their allies, that this is being done by the use of some high energy waves, because these are directed at American officials, particularly their intelligence officials, the CIA. Russians are poo-pooing it, and as you can see in Alexander Bikantov's advice, he's telling the mainstream media to avoid it, and he's saying these are fantasies for the tabloid press. The truth, however, is that the story is now taken so seriously that every respectable publication in the Western world is talking about this. New York Times, Economist, New Yorker, you name it, National Public Radio, you name it, and they have it. And they are all exercised about it. And nobody is quite denying that something like this is happening. In fact, American National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine, that is NASEM, they issued a report in December last year, December 2020, saying that they suspected that microwaves would alter brain functions in this manner. And maybe this was a use of microwaves at a very high frequency or whatever, don't ask me the physics of it, and that was causing massive damage to people's brains, and this was something that the Americans had to work on. They also said in that report that the Russians have been working on using microwaves like this since the 1950s, and these have in the past been directed at the US Embassy in Moscow. Sure enough, US Embassy CIA station chief in Moscow himself got affected by something, by the Havana syndrome, and had to be recalled. Similarly, there was also a paper in 2019 in the highly respected JAMA, that is Journal of American Medical Association, which also made similar suggestions. So it's not all a fantasy anymore. This is all being talked about. New Yorker itself has talked about 20 such cases in Vienna, and they've also said that this is not being taken very seriously. Now, the meeting that was called in the National Security Council last month, and this meeting was reported in the New York Times. I'm sharing the screenshot on the screen, and also I'll be sharing links of all these articles. That story says that the Friday preceding that story, DNI, that is Director National Intelligence in the National Security Council, which works as a part of the White House, of the executive branch as it's called, it held a meeting. That meeting was attended by Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Attorney General Merrick Garland, Director of CIA Bill Burns, Director FBI Christopher Wray, to just look at this business. And the fact is, this is now spreading a scare both in the CIA community and the State Department community. So many of them now are either unwilling to go to the places where these incidents have happened, even something like Vienna, which is a much coveted position, particularly in the intelligence community, simply because Vienna gives you, if you're a spy, the best quality, the best ease of doing business, right? So why wouldn't you like to go to Vienna? Plus also it's a nice town. But now people are hesitant about going, and also if they go, they don't want to take their families. Now there are many suspicions as to what might be happening. That is presuming that something is being done. And it is possible, one of the possibilities being discussed, that whoever is doing it, perhaps the idea was not to target human beings. Perhaps the idea was to use some very high frequency, specialized kind of microwaves or sonic waves or any waves to basically vacuum clean the conversations or communication, even the noise of computer keyboards, typewriter keyboards, because you can pick up that noise and translate that using, I presume, artificial intelligence. You can translate that into text, so you can know what secret reports are being written and sent. So it is possible that it was a technology being used for that, but then also in the course of time, people discovered that this could also be used to cause brain damage to people who you might be wanting to target, to demoralize, to spread a scare, to spread paranoia. And paranoia has been spread. For example, a lot of American officials in Syria said that they were similarly suffering, and they said the Russian aircraft, Russian fighter planes flying overhead were spreading these high frequency radiation waves, and that's what was causing them these issues. Later it turned out that they were victims of food poisoning. So this is also psychological warfare. You remember when the big standoff is still on, but when the standoff was at its peak in eastern Ladakh, stories had come out from Chinese English language media, such as the Chinese English language media is, but stories had come out that a lot of Indian soldiers got really sick because the Chinese side from a distance used high frequency microwaves to get them sick, and the temperature went up and they were vomiting, etc., etc. I saw it at that point as psychological warfare, and I think the general view at that point was psychological warfare. So those things are done to spread psychological scares. In this case now, if you find that some of these incidents are real, then it gets everybody very scared, and that is the stage where we are right now. So National Security Council in America has now set up two task forces. One task force is under the CIA. That task force they will investigate the causes of why this is happening. The second task force will look for commercial technologies to detect and block these attacks, to detect these radiations. Now, some machinery has been found, but nobody is quite sure it will work. Also, you can't be sure it will work unless you know for sure to begin with what exactly is causing it. Now, all this is not in the realm of speculation. All this has been confirmed on the record by Timothy Barrett, who's Assistant Director of National Intelligence for Strategic Communication from the Joint Intelligence Community Council. And Timothy said, this is a top priority for the intelligence community. National Security Council is leading this effort. Now, the US government and intelligence community, security community, has raised it from medical mystery to an urgent national security issue. This is not a fiction anymore. Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor of the US, he has said that he's assigning a senior director for intelligence in the National Security Council to keep track of this. Biden made a rare reference to it, as I mentioned earlier. So he said, while addressing intelligence officials, and this is a quoted statement in quote marks in American media, mainstream American media, not tabloids, New York Times, Post, etc., not denied. And he said, we are coordinating a government-wide effort to respond to these incidents because this challenge demands departments, agencies, and the entire intelligence community work together with urgency. Blinken, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, has written a letter to the State Department staff because he knows that morale is very low. State Department people are worried about themselves, their families, etc. So in his letter, he has acknowledged the growing concern, quote unquote, about unexplained health incidents, UHIs as these are called. And he said it's my top priority to address this. Then two top officials of the State Department are holding town halls with their staff in the affected embassies to shore up the morale. And similarly, top CIA officials are also carrying out similar exercises because they don't want morale of their staff to now go crashing down. Bill Burns, on the other hand, also spoke with National Public Radio, which is unusual, and that is the reason we are ignoring the Russian deputy spokesperson's warnings that this is about tabloids. This is not about tabloids. If the CIA chief is saying this in an interview to National Public Radio, which is widely heard not just in America but all over the world, again, I'm quoting him. So quote marks begin. It is real and it is serious. Only a few countries have the technological ability to do so. And he said that we are now looking at the answers, and he does not poo-poo it. He does not say it's paranoia. Once again, you want to understand, you want to be convinced that this is a more serious thing. Kamala Harris, on 24th of August, Kamala Harris was to go to Hanoi from Singapore. Her motorcade had started. She also had journalists accompanying her. Midway to the airport, the motorcade was told to turn back because they had discovered one of these unexplained health incidents at their mission in Hanoi. They didn't mention who, but this was serious enough for them to delay her visit. 3 hours later, her visit resumed because it was said that she'll be safe, and later American government, US government, State Department issued a statement saying that she was safe and everybody on her staff was safe. Now, the kind of literature I read is usually the kind of literature that not very serious people read. So I read a lot of spy fiction, a lot of military history, stuff like that. So there's a book called Spy Catcher, published in 1987, that I read. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, otherwise Google it. Spy Catcher was written by Peter Wright. It was a very controversial book because Peter Wright himself was a spy catcher, somebody in charge of counterintelligence, counterespionage in MI5 of Britain. Now, he wrote this book based on a lot of the facts he knew. And he mentioned an incident when he went to a veteran agent to ask for ideas on how to put something in the Soviet ambassador's office in London so conversations from his office could be reflected back and could be caught. And he said that they had the technological ability to put something, to position something across a window, looking inside the room of the Russian ambassador, Soviet ambassador, as long as they could pick up the sound waves. And the suggestion was to give the Soviet ambassador something that he'll be inclined to put on his desk, or maybe to suggest to him that this is something so beautiful you should put on his desk. And the veteran he goes to for advice says that, look, if you give them anything valuable, they'll go and sell it. They are Bolsheviks in their hearts. So give them something they can't sell. So the idea first was give them a silver bust of Lenin. But that Peter Wright said he rejected because he said the sound waves will then not reflect cleanly because Lenin had a bald head. So the sound waves from his head will scatter. So he wanted something else. And then they decided on a silver model of the Kremlin. And he said, in the model of the Kremlin, I'll put some concavities which will absorb those sound waves and reflect them to my monitor that will be in another window. Now I don't know whether it got done or not, but it's just that this is something that was being thought of in the mid 60s. You would have thought today things like this would be fantasies, but this is something which is right now being seen as a reality.